This story is about the America of town greens and peach festivals and parades. A story about the underlying power of community. This story is about those among us who are so much part of our culture and imagination that we hardly notice them. Looking back at American history, if you take the time to look just a little closer, you're almost always going to find a band. Community bands have been part of the American story from the beginning. Never quite in the limelight, but always close to the action. Drawn from farms and townships around the country, they emerged under the shadows of war. At the height of their popularity in the 19th century, they were fixtures in American public life, yet few of these bands would survive what the 20th century had in store. The four bands profiled in this film are in different ways reflections of change. They are part of a musical resurgence that gives new life and definition to the very notion of community.
Community bands are a great thing. Community bands and orchestras are great things because what you see there, in all of them, what you see there is how people feel about what they're doing.
Jonathan Harrington died in 1854 at the age of 94. He was a fife player and the last survivor of the Battle of Lexington. At the age of 14, he and 16-year-old drummer William Diamond led the local militia against the British in the opening salvo of the American Revolution. In that same battle, Harrington lost his father, who was struck down in front of his house on Lexington Green. Despite their heroics, the early fifers and drummers had their critics. Among them, George Washington, the new commander of the Continental Army. Washington recognized that the fife and drum corps, like the rest of the American forces, was largely untrained and disorganized. He commissioned Frederick von Steuben, a former Prussian officer, to standardize drilling practices. Fifes and drums now regulated life in the camps and garrisons through a procedure of calls, such as reveille and tattoo. A new system of beats and signals in battle provided cadence for the march. The musicians were usually boys as young as 10 or 12, often the sons of soldiers. They were vulnerable targets and were often among the first casualties. 13 drummers were killed at the Battle of Bunker Hill alone. As an aristocrat and accomplished flutist, Washington didn't consider fifes and drums suitable for entertainment. From his estate in Mount Vernon to his camp headquarters, he indulged his taste for fine music by hiring European ensembles of oboes, clarinets, French horns, and bassoons. These bands of music performed primarily for officers and mostly indoors, as the woodwinds didn't carry well outside. The average soldier, indeed the average American, would have had little exposure to this kind of music. All of this changed when a new family of brass instruments entered the picture. The keyed bugle and the ophicleide covered the entire range of the musical register, which allowed them to take over the melody lines from the woodwinds. They were also much louder and could be played outdoors. By 1830, almost all military bands used only brass instruments. The fife and drums remained, but the militia saw the emerging brass bands as a good way to recruit troops, and the general public began to take notice. Small civilian town bands began to form in various parts of the country, planting the first seeds of the community band movement. Most of the written music and instruments came from Europe, as there were few American composers and instrument makers. There was also an influx of European musicians. Disturbances on the continent sent a generation of restless Europeans to our shores. Germans, Irish, Italians, Swedes, and Poles, among others. All of these groups would go on to influence American culture in various and profound ways. The 1848 revolution in Germany resulted in a wave of migration into the hill country of central Texas. New Brownsville, Fredericksburg, Burney, all were settled by Germans who came to this country in search of political freedom and land. As they settled, they formed social organizations, shooting clubs, fraternal lodges, ladies' circles, and musical groups.
So back in 1860, the bands were formed primarily as auxiliary to singing organization. Each little community and each little settlement, even if they're just 15, 20 families living, they all formed their own singing organization. Sänger is what they call a singer, Sänger. Pretty soon they start having fests, Sängerfests. After the singing was over with, they wanted some music to dance to. That's where our band fits in, and I guess most of the little polka bands fit in, is they needed some music to dance to.
Agrarian life in 19th century America provided little in the way of formal music training, so people learned how to play instruments from family members. As a result, bands were typically filled with relatives. The Burney Band has been kept alive by the Bear family for 5 generations.
Oscar Bear was my grandfather. Otmar Bear was then his brother, who was a band leader until 1972, when he was about 88 years old, and he was just couldn't anymore. He played tuba, and he'd start playing his horn, and by the time he'd finished the song, he was tilting a little bit. We'd have to set him up, but it was just too much for him finally, so I took over from him in 1972.
I just hope we can keep it running. I guess that's the challenge we have, and as our society gets to be more and more of a melting pot, the challenge, I guess, for my generation and my kids and others is just to keep the band running and to keep it fresh, keep it fun. And it's not that we're an all-star band. It's not that we have the best musicians in the world. It's just that one bottom line thing that they've been around a long time and they never quit.
And I think I can use those tires on some other car.
You said you actually got that engine for that Dodge,
This is the oldest German band continuously playing for over 100 years outside of Germany. I don't even know if there are any bands in Germany that have been in operation 142 years. You have to remember, means that the band played right on through World War I with Germany, right here in Texas, all the time. It played right here all the time during World War II, still playing German music.
I know my grandfather and my great uncle were band leaders at that time, And they kept it going. I know, take my great uncle, he lost his son in Normandy, yet he kept the band playing.
The German music is fun, happy music. Mostly our repertoire is made up of marches, polkas, and waltzes. In elementary school now, when we taught children how to recognize the difference, the polka sound makes you want to go up and down, whereas the waltz sound in 3 makes you want to sway.
When I was going to school, I showed an interest in music, and they said, good, you can either be the 1/2 of 1% that can go play in a symphony orchestra somewhere, or you can teach, and that's your only 2 choices. But that's not true. The community bands and the volunteer status that goes with it gives us a healthy outlet for expression of an artistic side that we may not have the opportunity to express in our vocations. But probably most important is it lets us do something we really love.
The Bernie Band is as much a part of the landscape as sagebrush and acacia trees, playing in music festivals, Oktoberfests, summer concerts, and church fairs. They view themselves as ambassadors and have been recognized both by the Texas legislature and the Republic of Germany for preserving and promoting German culture.
We do a lot of traveling. We've been to Germany. We're going back to Germany this coming summer. We played in Salt Lake City. We played in Idaho. We played in Louisiana.
As Texas was being settled in the early 19th century, many Germans headed south to Mexico. For the past 8 years, the Bernie Band has traveled the same route to play at Oktoberfest events, in beer halls, shopping malls, even discotheques, earning just enough to pay for their trip. After 10 hours on the road, the band will perform that same evening for 4 solid hours.
All you have to do is listen to the music of North Mexico, and you'll see the influence of the German settlers in Texas. All the conjunto bands use accordions, a lot of them use tubas, and their music is primarily polkas, only with a Latin flavor.
If you hadn't noticed, you know, some of those guys are 60, 70. In fact, there's 1 or 2 that are above 80 now. And here they are in Mexico playing in a band. And I want to be like that. I look at some of those guys and go, if I am half as active as they are at their age, I have won the life battle.
Everybody stand up. Thank you.
Why we love it so much, I can't describe. It's sort of a love that you can have all your life. And maybe we're just designed to do that. I don't know.
Going back in small town America, it's not fancy, it's not big city, it's just small town America at its, what I think, at its finest.
By the time the Germans settled in Texas, the Civil War had begun. Community bands, then in their infancy, were drawn into the conflict. In the fervor of enlistment, local town bands would often sign up as a group and head off to war together. For both Union and Confederate armies, these bands were highly valued for recruiting. Officers pooled their own money to attract bands to their regiments. Unlike their Revolutionary War counterparts, most bandsmen performed other functions, usually as medics, assisting surgeons in field hospitals, evacuating wounded soldiers, and burying the dead. A new family of horns, developed by Adolph Sax, redefined band music. The sax horns, with their conical tube bores, produced a soft, mellow sound, which added color and depth to the music, yet contained the power to be heard outdoors. The introduction of piston and rotary valves made the horns easier to play, and bands grew larger. Some of these instruments were modified to be played over the shoulder, so that the bands could march in front of the troops and project the sound behind them. Under General William Sherman, bands performed at the front during battles. "Play them loud and keep on playing them," Sherman said, "and never mind if a bullet goes through a trombone, or even a trombonist now and then." The soldiers on both sides loved the bands. In Fredericksburg, after listening to songs from the Union Army, a rebel voice was heard across the river, "Give us one of ours," and the band struck up Dixie. Sometimes, soldiers on both sides would join in and sing a familiar song. The sentimental and nostalgic songs posed a problem because too many homesick soldiers deserted because of them, and deserters were shot. The bands also played for executions. At war's end, these musicians returned home and gave birth to a golden age of American music. The 19th century in America saw enormous changes in industry and technology, and community bands flourished in this new climate. Domestic manufacturers were now producing musical instruments on a large scale. Steamboats were joined by railroads, crisscrossing the country and opening up new frontiers. Many bands took advantage of this new mobility by touring and tapping into a nascent sense of nationalism. Communities around the country witnessed the creation of our first nationwide popular movement. A succession of new American composers and bandmasters emerged, among them Patrick Gilmore, who immigrated from Ireland and dominated early American band music. The prolific Henry Fillmore, who published under many names, Gus Beans, Al Hayes, Harry Hartley, and Henrietta Hall. Stephen Foster, considered America's first songwriter. And the godfather of marching music, John Philip Sousa. Sousa joined the Marine Band when he was a child and eventually became its conductor. With a melodic gift for inspiration, he wrote and conducted 136 marches. The influence of these new composers and their bands was far-reaching. In every corner of the country, in every community, bands wove themselves into the fabric of American life. There were bands of all shapes and sizes, emerging cultural symbols in a nation forging a new identity in the aftermath of the Civil War. The community band movement reached its peak during this period. By the end of the 19th century, close to 20,000 bands were performing nationwide. One such band came to life in Bucks County, Pennsylvania in 1877. When a family of shoemakers decided to start a town band, they could not have predicted that their creation would outlast 20 American presidents and 2 world wars.
That's there. The F, maybe push in a little bit to compromise.
When the band first formed, they were given some silver instruments, and so they called the Silver Citizens Cornet Band. And when the band expanded and they started to get new instruments to cover a wider range of playing, then the instruments weren't silver anymore. And at the time of the late 1800s and early 1900s, everything German was in fashion, so they called it the Germania Band. And then when the war broke out, it wasn't too good to be related to or associated with something with a German name anymore, obviously. So they took away the Germania Band name and changed it to the Quakertown Band.
The Quakertown Band survived the Depression and managed to prosper during a century that saw most community bands dwindle and die away. The band's evolution from town band to parade band to the concert band it is today was overseen by 13 different conductors. The band's present conductor, Richard Karshner, brought the band more visibility and discipline. Band members describe him as something of a taskmaster.
First time play, second time play soft, because we're going to be featuring the clarinet second time through.
We don't just go through the music and play it from beginning to end, and if it was okay, it was nice, and if it wasn't okay, we won't talk about the problems. We do address musical things. We do talk about correct rhythms and right notes and those kinds of things.
One where I asked you about before.
Okay. Second time through your soft.
Okay, that's not what you conducted.
No.
That's
You gestured nice and full. Where, on the second time through?
Yes. Yes, you did.
Yes, you did. Okay, well, forget that.
We are very fortunate in that almost each of our section leaders does have a degree in music or has studied music at the college level. Now, some of those folks got performance degrees with the idea of actually performing and making some money. A lot of other folks, however, are very, very excellent performers who would prefer to make their living some other way.
I became involved with the band in 1957 through my history teacher in high school. At that time I played in their high school band, and he said, why don't you come to Quakertown Band and play? So I did, you know. And I played maybe 60 to 62, somewhere in there, and then I quit. I didn't play for 40 years. Didn't touch an instrument. Sold all my horns and everything. And then about 3 years ago, my son wanted to learn how to play sax. So I got him a sax and taught him to play. Well, then he didn't want it anymore. I thought, no, let's see if I can still play. I came to Quakertown Band. Rich Karshner had just taken over, and I was playing clarinet. And he said, we need a bass clarinetist. Why don't you do it? I said, okay. So I started playing bass clarinet. I love it because I don't have to be going all the time. I just go bum, bum, bum.
Well, the band is obviously an institution in town. I mean, it's something that people have known for the 125 years, and it's interesting over the years. It's actually gotten a little younger. We used to call it the Geezer Band way back when, and now we're getting more high school kids in it and college kids that are coming back to play in it. It's a band that has some incredible players in it, and it's a band that when we really put our minds to it, we can play terrific. We can play with anybody.
As with the Bernie Band, the Quakertown Band has survived over the years because core families have retained deep roots within local soil. There are married couples, siblings, grandparents, grandchildren, generations of performers, creating a strong sense of continuity that gives the band its staying power.
You see some of these people, quite a few of them, they're there at every concert. They sit out there in their lawn chairs and they just love it. You know, there's no commercials. They look forward to, where are you playing next week? You know, well, we'll be there. And I think you'll have more of this going on. Humanity will express itself more and more through that. Just to keep music alive and the arts alive, it's time for that.
After the successes of the 19th century, community bands were greeted by challenges in the 20th century that few could overcome. The train, which had delivered the bands to audiences, was followed by the automobile, which drew the audiences away. At the turn of the century, the phonograph arrived, and then the radio, so that Americans increasingly listened to music at home. The popularity of movies continued the steady migration indoors. Changes in the world of music accelerated the decline of community bands, and it all began in New Orleans. In 1898, at the end of the Spanish-American War, military bands returned to the port to decommission, and the city was flooded with used band instruments. Local black musicians quickly bought up hundreds of these instruments and began to form bands. The structured and melody-based European music soon gave way to an African sound based on shifting rhythms and accents, and ragtime was born. Without the constraints of traditional concepts of form, ragtime musicians were able to improvise and incorporate other kinds of music. Over time, ragtime, the blues, and marching music fused into what came to be known as jazz. Big Dixieland jazz bands and swing bands became wildly popular, catching the attention of the emerging record industry, and popular music entered the commercial arena for good. Marching music had made its contribution to the genre, but there was no place for it at the table commercially. It was at once adopted and orphaned. Only in the schools and colleges did marching music gain in popularity. Community bands continued to play traditional music as well as more popular tunes, but by now they had lost their audience and faded away. By 1960, fewer than 500 of these bands were left in the country. From the many early casualties of the 20th century, one band has recently re-emerged. They play the same music today that was heard throughout northern New England many years ago. New Hampshire in the late 19th century was a state very much in transition. Local farmers couldn't compete with the larger farms in the Midwest and left the state in droves. Agriculture was gradually being replaced by logging, mining, and manufacturing. Railroads opened the state to sightseers, and the tourist industry began to take shape. Yet for all this activity and flux, rural New Hampshire remained a region of very small communities. The town bands that arose during this period were also small. Too small for Sousa and his 60-piece compositions, but just about right for R.B. Hall, the Maine March King. Hall was a contemporary of Sousa, but never achieved the corresponding fame. He was a virtuoso cornetist and spent his career playing for small community bands in Maine. Although lame from birth, Hall could be seen limping down the street at the head of a parade with a crutch in one hand and a cornet in the other. He composed marches that were played as far away as England, but were for the most part simple and unpretentious, ideal for the smaller bands in rural New England, such as the Lime Cornet Band. The Lime Band formed on the banks of the Connecticut River in the 1840s and played through the Civil War and into the 20th century, where it met the fate of so many other bands. Sometime in the 1930s, the band disappeared from local records and would have remained in historical obscurity were it not for the discovery of this photograph in 1983. Earl Strout, a local businessman and clarinetist, came across the picture at a yard sale and with his wife Bev decided to resurrect the band. So after a long period of dormancy, the Limetown Band is back. True to the spirit of R.B. Hall, the band plays the old ballads and marches up and down the valley. The membership changes with the seasons, but there is a devoted core group, and they are always in demand. They play at road races, bridge dedications, senior centers, pumpkin festivals, and of course, town greens.
I started in because the whole family were playing some kind of musical instrument, mostly woodwinds. And I was a baby of the family, and actually I was taught by other members in the family, if you can understand this. My older brother on down through. My hands were so small at that time that I was playing an E-flat clarinet, which is still my favorite, which I still play, by the way. I can play a hard rehearsal, let's say, and when I'm done, I feel like I've had a good night's sleep. I'm really relaxed.
Walt Fry, I've known Walt ever since we moved to Hanover. First as a doctor at the VA hospital, just a wonderful, caring, the kind of doctor we all wish we had and don't have. He's got a huge, vast knowledge of early band music. And he plays the peck horn, which is a little E-flat alto horn, and what he primarily does is sit there and play off beats, after beats. But Walt doesn't mind at all. He's right there and bop, 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 bop.
The thing I like best is not only contributing to the sound, but having kind of an easy part to play on the horn. And I'm perfectly willing to do it because I can do it sort of without a lot of effort and then listen to what's going on around me, which is what I really enjoy.
Herb and Laura Very bring up the rear on drums and tuba. Herb has always claimed that as long as you get the first note right and the last one, it doesn't matter much what happens in between.
Sometimes we even have to stop and start over. And most of our audiences are very forgiving.
I think it's noticed, but no, you don't get picked on or anything for making mistakes, and everybody makes them. Well, the Limetown Band it's kind of your classic little town band. It's a group of friendly people who love to play their instruments and play their music.
What do you do when it's 100 in the shade? You get out of the shade. I'm sorry. Okay. People of Ohio, by Henry Fillmore. You'll never recognize it, by God rest his soul. Are we ready? 1, 2, ready, play.
Mike Jarvinen, a graduate student at Dartmouth College, could have played with younger bands, but he chose the Limetown Band instead.
My idea of an older generation had always been that you retire, you find a hobby, and you kind of just sit back and hang out. But this group has entirely changed my way of thinking about what an older generation does and what its purpose could be as far as influencing younger generation. I mean, I consider a lot of them to be, even though they don't know it, my mentors and role models and contacts for, you know, things that I just feel are important.
I think a community band can give a community some sort of focus. It gives people a chance to gather around in a fairly social situation. It doesn't matter whether the little children are paying much attention to the band or not. It's all right if they're just running around playing with a puppy or chasing a ball, but they're there, their parents are there, their older siblings are there, the grandparents are there. It helps to focus community gatherings, I think, to have music.
The last half-century has been a period of tremendous technological change. The dominance of television and computers has altered the way many Americans spend their time. Virtual communities have added to the recent phenomenon of social disengagement. Participation in community groups is now at an all-time low. Over the last 25 years, enrollment in clubs and civic organizations has dropped by half. Voting is down by 25%, church attendance by 30%. By any measure, Americans are spending less time together. Although new technologies provide a powerful distraction, the urge to connect may be stronger. The faint pulse of American communities is showing signs of strength. Community bands have returned to the landscape. In Oregon, the Tualatin Valley Community Band, the Centerville Community Band in Ohio. Performing in Greater Omaha, the Nebraska Wind Symphony. There are now over 1,500 community bands in the country, and their numbers are growing. From the Baldwin Pops Band in Fairhope, Alabama, to the Shoreview Northern Lights Variety Band in Minnesota, community bands are coming to life in old ways and new. The Seed and Feed Marching Abominable in Atlanta, Georgia, combine music with street theater. They are part of a new breed of marching bands that rally people in urban communities in a search for common ground. And 3,000 miles to the west, one community band finds itself riding yet another wave of change.
We used to march in Fresno's parade a couple times, and the one year we marched, the one block we had to march through the Klan. You know, the Klan's there with their sheets on their head. And I was thinking to myself that night, it's like, okay, those guys may hate us for being gay, but you know when they're there, they take their hoods off and they're in the shower tonight, they're going to be going, da 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 da. Oh, it's that gay band in my head.
The San Francisco Gay and Lesbian Freedom Marching Band is the first openly gay musical organization in the world. They've played and marched for millions of people for more than 2 decades.
One special element we have with this particular band has to do with its history, has to do with the fact that it was born to serve other people. It was born to use that music to make social change, to question prejudice.
The band was created in 1978, at a time when most gays and lesbians were still in the closet. At that time, the very idea of coming out was a contentious issue in the gay community. It wasn't until the Briggs Initiative, an organized effort by conservative groups to remove homosexuals from classrooms, and Anita Bryant's Save Our Children campaign, that the gay community became truly galvanized, both politically and culturally. The band was founded by John Sims, a French horn player from the Midwest who taught music in San Francisco. He wanted to do something public and showy to answer Anita Bryant in those anti-gay campaigns, and he settled on the most positive and non-threatening community symbol he could think of: a marching band.
We marched in parades where, although there were boos and jeers at the beginning, years that we marched in them, we marched in places where there was deep-seated hatred of gays and lesbians. And I think that we won a lot of people over. And I would have to say that many of the people that were gay or lesbian came out to their parents through the band also. Because it was safe. It was a safe, well, Mom, I belong to this group. And it was a breakthrough for people to be able to do that. And to see that we were just as wholesome as anyone else.
It's like dressy Bessie hell.
Women, there's a lot more women. At first the band was basically a parade band, and then it expanded to have a lot of other groups in it, and added women, lesbians to the name of the group about 10 years into the life of the group. And that was during the time when AIDS was killing off a great number of band members, and the influx of women saved the group and gave us a new strong leadership.
It's sort of sad if you think of it that way. I don't like to think of it that way, that there's a place for somebody else because the first person died. That's a terrible thought. But that was the effect. That was the effect. So it changed our culture, it changed our focus, it changed what we spent our money on, what we spent our time on. It changed everything.
The band is a really interesting, diverse group of people from all walks of life. Despite our name, we have anywhere from straight to gay to bisexual to transgender. We have people from different classes, people from different backgrounds, people from all over, people who come in just because they're good musicians, people who come in who haven't picked up an instrument in years. We have semi-pros, we have you know, amateurs who just want to play because they're starting out and they want somewhere to play. It's an amazing group of people to play with. Very eclectic.
I joined the band because I felt it was a way for me to combine art and politics. Making music is very important to me, but being part of the band allows me to be, the founder used the term, an ambassador of joy.
band always keeps you on your toes because it's always changing. You got a change of personnel every year. So it's always in flux, and that's probably a good thing, or else we'd ossify and the band would just simply become something that's not useful anymore.
I'm very blessed in my life. I actually have a family that loves me, a biological family that loves me, my partner family loves her. We do things together, but for a lot of people, the band is their family. A lot of people, gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender people, have been ostracized by their families of origin, and the band is a place for them to go and be with other gay, lesbian people and play music together.
Not only do we cluster together with our music and thrive on that, we bring the community at large together too, gay and straight. And I think that music is one thing that it's really hard to hate.
Nothing like live music, and there's no live music as really, I think, convenient and as well known as a marching band. We don't need amps. You know, you can't take strings outdoors, but a marching band you can always have. And we've actually been called the official band of San Francisco.
Part of the reason I like fiddle is because you start reading American history and you find out, well, the fiddle player wasn't a performer. He was some farmer out in the sticks, and he was called every Saturday because they had to have music to dance to. And whether he played good or bad, it was there. It was important. It brought the community together. And the band sort of functions that way too. It's not whether you play beautifully and professionally and everything, it's that you play for your community.
Growing up as a gay individual, there were times when I felt like, well, I'm the only one in the world. And to have 500,000 people cheer as you walk by, or 750,000 people, or 10 people, or 1. It really cannot be described. When you march down the street and the name is on the group, and you march by and people are giving you thumbs up or clapping or screaming or cheering, just because you're there, that, I don't know, that's the greatest joy.
In 1896, on a transatlantic trip, John Philip Sousa looked out to sea, and a tune came to him. It stayed with him throughout the voyage. When he got home, he wrote it down. His band played it at almost every concert until he died more than 25 years later. Stars Stars and Stripes Forever is the national march of the United States, and it is the signature march of community bands. The song was written during the lead-up to the Spanish-American War, and it is full of patriotic, even militaristic fervor. Over the years, the song has lost none of its intensity or power, but has become to musicians and audiences alike an anthem of togetherness rather than a call to war. Sousa once said that a march speaks to a fundamental rhythm in the human organization, and is answered. A march is much more than music for the feet. It is, at its core, as these bands demonstrate in front of audiences large and small, music for the heart.
I certainly don't feel like I am assertive and the type of person who would ever have to play a trumpet, because I think with that instrument you really have to be very apt to be forceful and out on the front line. I think I'm more retiring and happy to be in the background, like, you know.
The trumpets are not prima donnas. I would like to clarify that.
I think the trumpets tend to be a little on the prima donna side.
But I would just like to say for the record that we have one of the most shy trumpet sections I have ever met in my life. There are people there who you have to beg to take first parts.
But it's very hard to get trumpeters to stop playing. Whenever there's any downtime, they're always noodling around, they're always running through the music, even though they know it.
Trumpet players, I have referred to them as my own private hell, because they play the same things over and over and over again when they're warming up.
Well, trumpet players never have their music ready in time. They're always fumbling with their music. No matter what band you play in, the trumpet players don't get their music up on time.
The trumpet players are usually pretty loud and brassy.
Well, the trumpet players do tend to believe that there are no other instruments in the band. Every other section, people keep coming up to the conductor and saying, "Why does so-and-so always get the solos? I want to play a solo every once in a while too." And the trombones are sitting in the back going, "I don't want this part, it has a solo in it. You play it."
I think those people who are more meticulous are those who are drawn to the reeds. Or put it this way, those people who are drawn to the reeds need to be more meticulous. Generally, a woodwind player will have 3 or 4 reeds that they are working and breaking into a particular point. Brass players, you take the thing out of the case, you stick it in the horn and you blow.